The OSI teaches that everything in the universe happens according to the grand plan. But the stranger that arrived in Halcyon was an unplanned variable. From the moment he landed in Emerald Vale, his actions altered the course of history. The events on Tartarus brought about the end of the board's authority. But the board's mistakes would haunt the colony for decades to come. The damage they left behind would require the work of a generation to repair. Dr. Phineas Wells began reviving a handful of the Hope's colonists: engineers, scientists, technicians, and intellectuals. They were among the brightest minds the Earth had ever sent out into the stars. The Hope scientists and engineers woke up in a colony descending headlong into total collapse. With no way to return to Earth, they had no choice but to band together and devote themselves to the cause of saving Halcyon. The people of Halcyon were nothing if not hardy. In the absence of the board's authority, many of the colony's settlements banded together with a single purpose in mind: survival. Life was especially hard in the years to come. Some towns dissolved by attrition and starvation, but most of them found a way to carry on. In the years to come, Halcyon was forced to reckon with its newfound freedom. The board was gone, and for better or worse, the colony was responsible for its own destiny. As the colony struggled to survive, the inspirational story of the iconoclasts spread like wildfire, and Graham was able to bring many of the smaller Terra 2 townships into the fold. However, his zealous obsession with spreading the word blinded him to the needs of a growing organization, and the movement was unsustainable at scale. The iconoclast way seemed to work best, and ultimately petered out on Monarch. In the end, after years of struggling against its own obsolescence, Edgewater lost a battle of attrition to plague, marauder attacks, and desertion. Edgewater was never visited by another stranger, with the exception of a small party of marauders who raided what was left of its cantina. The loss of Junlei Tennyson hit the Groundbreaker hard, and even threatened to undercut the ship's independence. Taking up the example of their fallen captain, citizens banded together and rallied anew for the Groundbreaker's autonomy. Junlei was remembered as a folk hero, the spark that ignited a flame, heralding a new age of proud defiance against anyone who would challenge the Groundbreaker's sovereignty. The rediscovery of the Hope and the abandonment of the lifetime employment program forced Byzantium to come to terms with some uncomfortable realities about the state of Halcyon. While Byzantines were reluctant to surrender the luxuries they'd grown accustomed to, the board's diminished authority gave them little choice in the matter. Nearly everyone had to learn to make do with less. Some even had to get jobs. It was a dark time indeed. Even the Gorgon asteroid, though a distant enigma to most of Halcyon, felt the aftershocks of your actions. The Gorgon project created divisions among Wells' newly awakened scientists. Many wanted to let the facility and its failures rot, but others saw an opportunity to improve the work of the original scientists, and perhaps the lives of Halcyon's masses. With no one to champion the project, however, the promise of Adrena time faded, and the Gorgon facilities fell into disuse once more. Lucian Bancroft had high hopes for Project Gorgon. However, the board's fall stripped him of the power and authority he'd wielded for so long. Like many of his peers, he was forced to take up a job based on his meager qualifications. He was relegated to dirt farming in the marauder-infested outskirts of Terra 2. In spite of everything, the Gorgon asteroid remained a sobering reminder of the potential for progress and disaster in humanity's most ambitious efforts. The Rizzo's company in Halcyon dissolved after the collapse of the board. The Eridanos atmospheric complex developed a notorious reputation as a derelict settlement, populated by grinning killers. These stories kept the infection safely contained, until a group of salvagers braved the complex and stole 20 crates of Spectrum Brown. Inside these crates, long-dormant parasites began to stir. In the absence of board regulation, Spectrum Brown made its way across the colony by passing hands between the desperate, the apathetic, and the lonely. A few settlements tried, and failed, to ban Spectrum Brown. The drink became a dangerous escape for anyone who dreamed of happier days. Cedric Kincannon quietly disappeared in the aftermath of the Eridanos incident. As unlikely as it would be for Cedric to have slipped off-world before the infection claimed Eridanos, no one has ever seen him among the waves of madly grinning infected plaguing the colony. Curiously, no one has ever seen Cedric's former secretary, Eileen, among the infected either. After Spectrum Brown's widespread distribution, Spencer Woolrich experienced a sudden upswing in his popularity. Viewers found his on-screen conduct to be more boisterous, energetic, and personable than ever before. The wide grin constantly beaming from his narrow face certainly helped fit his friendly image. When asked about his newfound on-screen charisma, Spencer had this to say: "Happy workers lead to happy customers. Happy customers are repeat customers." Bertie Holcomb adapted to his new role as a host for parasitic slugs surprisingly well. Perhaps because he wasn't using his brain for all that much in the first place. The slugs put a swift, if unorthodox, end to Bertie's fears of being valued solely for his tossball skills. Of all the infected in the colony, Bertie's wild, beaming smile would always be the most genuine. The prophet of profitability was not spared from the infection quickly overtaking Eridanos. Due to her newfound chronic delight, the prophet was no longer able to effectively advise her clients on productivity. Her disciples, similarly bliss-enwrapped, lost interest in the hot, cold walks and hourly purges. Despite all this, the prophet's spirits were hardly dampened. After all, she no longer had the capacity to worry about any of her business rivals. After you killed her parents, Ellie left the Unreliable. She returned to her old life in the Groundbreaker's orbit, but her days of mischief and nights of carousal had lost their appeal. She found herself taking bigger and more foolish risks, but something irrevocable had changed. Clyde Harlow and his gang of pirates never had the chance to go down in a blaze of defiance. The deteriorating state of the colony took its toll, and they fell into mutiny when their supplies ran low. Felix was not one of the crew killed in that mutiny. He disappeared, only to reappear a few months later in Terra 2, looking to help the effort to save Halcyon. He was given a job hauling boxes for a local laboratory. After all he'd seen and heard adventuring with you, the Vicar Maximilian de Soto renounced his faith and joined the effort to rebuild the colony. Ironically, he finally found the joy that had eluded him over the course of his life, and realized that perhaps he was always meant to be just a simple laborer after all. He quickly dismissed the idea. After Junlei's murder, Parvati disappeared from the Unreliable during a refueling stopover. She left no word of where she went, only a snippet of a poem she'd meant to send Junlei, written by a long-dead Earth writer, John Donne. It read, "Study me then, you who shall lovers be, at the next world, that is, at the next spring, for I am every dead thing, in whom love wrought new alchemy." Before his untimely death, Captain Alex Hawthorne had plans to restore and modify, for combat purposes, a sanitation and maintenance automechanical that he'd found in a state of disrepair in Emerald Vale's scrapyard. That unit remains broken down and forgotten in the Unreliable supply closet to this day. Though Minister Clark was eventually released from house arrest, long years of isolation left him a changed man, little suited for bureaucratic work or for the colony that was changing around him. He remained in his estate largely by choice, fading from public view. As for Dr. Phineas Wells, he spent his remaining years in his orbital lab. He was never able to come to terms with his own past, troubled by the decision of placing all his faith in the first colonist he ever revived, the infamous Captain of the Unreliable. The revival project yielded mixed results. Phineas, weighed down by limited support and his own guilt, struggled to revive more than a handful of scientists and engineers. They made a heroic effort to solve the colony's problems, but with small numbers and facing long odds, their solutions never caught on. Only a few of the Hope's colonists were successfully revived. Wells died before he could see the fruits of his labor. He passed away a haunted man, crushed by the guilt of his failures. Small, petty factions squabble over what remains of the colony. Every attempt to reach out to Halcyon's neighbors is met with silence. And what about you, the unplanned variable in the history of Halcyon? You brought an end to the chaos on Tartarus, and left Dr. Wells to save Halcyon on his own. You had more pressing matters to attend to. As you tasted your first scoop of Rizzo's partially emulsified, semi-frozen milk-like dessert, you realized something. All your troubles, all your adventures, all your struggles and choices, they had all led to this single moment. And it was all worth it. No one knows what's happened to Earth, and no one knows what the future has in store for Halcyon. All we know for certain is this: the name of the Unreliable and that of its intrepid captain will remain the subject of countless stories for years to come.